What I want to do now is walk through making a new Rails app. And when we make a new Rails app, I'm going to walk through the commands, and I want to do this in a way where, as we're doing this, the things that the Rails commands are going to generate for us are going to be a fairly significant amount of code. And so I'm going to run through a particular command. What I want you to focus on is, what is the process that I'm following here for figuring out what should be done? So the goal here is to make a new Rails app. We're going to review some commands, and along the way today, I will show you an optional Rails 7 feature. So what is the app that we're going to build? We're going to be working on an app called Rotten Potatoes. If you've seen the movie review site, Rotten Tomatoes, sort of the idea. Our version is going to be much more simple, but it's going to be an app that deals with movies, reviews, and so on. This is the basis of the app that you'll be working on for the next couple CHIPS assignments that you'll be doing in this class. So what are we going to do? I already have Rails installed on my computer. If you're using Codio, you'll have Rails installed in that environment already. But what I want to explore is sort of 3 primary commands that Rails provides us. Rails new will help us generate an app. Rails generate, once we have an app, will allow us to create code that solves a bunch of these problems for us, that gets things set up. And then we'll use the Rails server command to run the app itself. So we'll come back to that in a moment. I am going to be in a sort of clean directory where I want this app to exist. And the first thing that I want to demonstrate is, before we run a task like creating a new application, it's just helpful to double check that we have things. So if I run Rails-V, something you should just always do if you're about to start something, make sure it's set up right. This thing is telling me Rails 7. It's the current version. And what I always like to do, any command worth using is going to provide a flag called --help. It is perhaps one of the safest things that you can run in a new command if you're not sure how it works. -h might do something specific, but --help will give us all of the options, hopefully, that the command tool that we're using provides us. So just run through, give it a double check to make sure that it has the things that we're looking for. In this case, I happen to know that there's Rails new, and Rails is awesome because each of these subcommands also provides their own help information about the things that we can do. So Rails new will be our way to build a new app. We give it an app name and a bunch of options. And one of those helpful options, and I'm going to just start at this point, I'm going to, just for brevity's sake, run through the commands that I have here. One of these really helpful options is something that you'll find in a lot of commands, and I encourage you to use this frequently. It's something that I sometimes forget to do, and when I remember, I'm always thankful that I remember to do it. And this is the option --pretend. You'll see commands called this dry run. What is happening here? Rails is giving us an option to say, you're about to do something which makes a bunch of changes, that's going to create some stuff, modify some stuff. Let me tell you what I'm about to do before I go do it. And we can see here that if we run Rails new rotten potatoes --pretend, what Rails is going to do for us is generate a ton of files. Some of these really helpful, a README. We'll come back to rake files later in the course. A gem file, how we track our dependencies in Ruby apps, right? The app directory. And here we see things like app controllers. We see things like app views that have some defaults. We see a bunch of configuration options that we don't need to discuss right now, but we'll get to later in the course. A config for databases, a folder to deal with database interactions. We'll spend some time on that later today and in the coming lectures, and a bunch of stuff. Hopefully, some testing folders are generated by default. We're not going to use those today, but we'll certainly spend time on testing frameworks in the coming modules. What I'm going to do for this demo, though, is ask Rails to give me just the minimal stuff so that we can focus on the simplest app. The right options for you will depend on what's there. So what I'm going to do is run Rails new, rotten potatoes, and it'll set that up. We've run Rails new. Rails created a whole bunch of files. I am still in the directory that I made the app in, but Rails has created for me a rotten potatoes directory. I can cd into that. And in my environment, I have some stuff helpfully set up that tells me that I am now on a Git branch. This one's called main. I have some little things that tell me that there are new files. But if I do this, if you're ever working with Git, hopefully you'll practice throughout the course. Really helpful thing to do, Git status, get a feeling of what's there. Again, we can see Rails created a whole bunch of stuff. And this is where, again, I'm going to copy these commands. Very rarely would I recommend that you just git add everything. In this case, it's a new app, git add -a, git commit, initial commit. And now we're sort of set up and ready to go. And so we have a Rails app that actually has a bunch of functionality. So in this case, Rails provides a bunch of commands by default. One of these things is, of course, the Rails server command. And as we run Rails server, we'll see that it gives us a bunch of information here. It tells us that it's booting up. We don't need to worry about threads. It tells us we've got a development environment. We'll definitely be talking about that in a few lectures. And helpfully here, listening on HTTP 127.0.0.1:3000. Whether we have an IP address and a port, we can open this up in the browser. There we go. If I type the right address, all right, maybe not the most exciting web application, but a lot has actually happened right now. Is we have a server booted up. It's listening on a port for us. And what we have is a thing that has a default controller that responds to this route. Rails handled it all for us. It loads a view, and it renders that back to the user. Of course, at this point, we have no data in our application, but it's actually listening, and it's responding to requests.